Okay. So, Tanzanina Kanipuit Wapaske Mikasimi Kwanapio, many blessings to all my relations in the four directions. I want to thank everybody, for being present and, coming together during these urgent times. People remember just prior to the patriation of the Constitution, there was the Constitution Express, right? 1980, was it 80? Anyway, they were up in arms about Section 35 with respect to when that patriation occurred, that those Aboriginal rights and title would be recognized. And so people, all BC, the BC chiefs and many people all across coast to coast Canada came together, and in total, so somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 people showed up in Ottawa. And as my memory jars a little bit, Trudeau didn't, instantly, or not Trudeau, but the government at the time didn't quickly yield to that, and so they had to take it before the global community, and that's when it was enshrined. Those Section 35 was enshrined. So now we're talking about, is the box empty? Is it full? We say it has all of our Aboriginal rights and title exist right there. The Trudeau government has now said that, and has said for a while that no, that's an empty box, and those rights will need to be delineated and described. And those rights that are not delineated and described will be extinguished. And I think that's where we stand right now. And I want to thank former Senator Roland Crowe for joining us, and for helping to give his input to help empower grassroots communities at this difficult time. So with that, I would do a great injustice introducing you, Roland. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Who are you talking to?
I'm talking to you, yeah. Maybe give us a...
Okay, a long time ago, I was just a young Indian farmer and had no more land to farm, so I got extremely lucky in politics. I became a counselor on the Five-Pot band number 75, and then a vice chief in the FSIN, the second vice chief for 2 terms. I served 4 terms as a Five-Pot chief, and then I moved and sought the position of chief of the FSIN, and I done 2 terms as a vice chief, and then I done 3 terms as chief of the federation. That's basically the long and short of it all.
Wow. So we've had some recent conversations, sort of preliminary conversations to talk about the plight of nations today, and what's happening at over 300 termination tables, or 300 bands that are at termination tables all across the country, coast to coast, and so our communities, they're trying to, I think at this point, establish, well, first try to understand where we are, and what types of things that they're going to need to do to implement their self-determination.
I hate to jump back in, but I failed to mention that I was chief in the negotiations for Treaty of Land Entitlement, which brought us 1.5 million acres, and I also successfully negotiated the first gaming agreement for the 72 bands we have in the province. Thank you.
Thank you. So a lot of our people are struggling now with the understanding the treaty land entitlement as well as the 10-year grant. And I think at this point, Kevin, would you have a couple of questions for Roland? You have to unmute yourself. You can keep yourself unmuted for the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for having me on, John. It's a pleasure to be part of this interview. So I'm a First Nation individual from northern Saskatchewan, Treaty 10 territory, and so let's just back up a bit and explain how I began my journey into discovering what was going on. So in September, I was asked to do some research about a project that was happening in the traditional territory, and so I started researching it. And then in my research, I found the First Nation Land Management Act, and I took a step back, and then I wondered what was this. So I started researching it further and further and further, and it just kept leading me down this rabbit hole. And then I started running into and getting in contact with all these forward thinkers and I guess basically teachers that have done this for so many years. And what I have found is just there's no communication at all in regards to what's happening. It's all happening, in secret, so to speak. It's almost like, in my opinion, they use the COVID as a cover, and it's just, it's really unfortunate. It's all a step process. I haven't really been familiar with the treaty land entitlement because I just figured that was something that was signed long ago. But when you did the interview with the nation down in the south there, you mentioned that that there was a clause coming up, and it was going to happen within a year or two, and I just wanted you to speak on that. And then, as we go further into the interview, Roland, if you could just describe and maybe answer some questions, that would be great. Thank you.
What's the specific question again? Sorry.
So yeah, Kevin, what would be your specific question in that regard?
So so I guess my specific question is, can you explain, being in the level, because FSIN is one of the highest levels, if not the highest levels of Indigenous government in Saskatchewan. So how do they play into all of this?
Well, the FSIN today is a very different organization from its founding fathers. Today, the organization in those days were an organization that looked after everybody and was there for the needy, not the greedy. And I'm very straightforward about my comments, and I've said them in public before. I have no problem with words and the things that I say and do, but the FSI was well respected because we always tried to help and led the path in some of the ways. But today, the government has taken hold of our organization internally and politically, and that's why we're not getting any place. In the Cree language, we say "Kushtachuak," that means they're scared. And we have too many Indian Act chiefs today rather than treaty chiefs.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, so what we have going on right now is we have what the Trudeau government and Joe Weider are calling bilateral mechanisms, and they're coming together and jointly bringing things about. But I mean, obviously, this is all under a federal framework, and it seems as though it doesn't seem as though our own people have become the federal government's and Crown's first line of defense by way of
when we discussed treaty land entitlement, it was a bilateral agreement with the federal crown and right of Great Britain in those days. And the province was at the table, but they were only observers. They were not allowed to speak or voice their opinion. And every time the premier came to me and said, "We got a problem, Chief," I said, "No, it's not my problem. It's an issue between you and the federal government. You take your problems to the federal government."
Yeah.
We talk about the empty box, full box concept. There's no real mechanism in place up to far back to remember, because these discussions as far as a full box, empty box should be only with the federal crown, the federal government.
Right.
And then the federal government would instruct the provinces on how they're going to fulfill treaty agreements. The provinces were an afterthought when the treaties were signed, and they should have no jurisdiction whatsoever on our territories.
So, where's your greatest painful point of reference right now that comes to your mind when you consider what's going on?
Like I said, we've been infiltrated by wolves in sheep's clothing, and they've even got into our chiefs and councils, and they've penetrated our provincial organization, the FSI, and so is our tribal councils. They determine what's going to happen, how much money they get, and how they are required to spend it. Now, there is no true Indian government, in my view, if you're at the doorstep, and I make reference to the AFN in the past and today, and the FSIN, they're knocking on the door hat in hand to get third level of government recognition. So while they're doing that, we're calling ourselves First Nations. What is going to happen if they're recognized as a brown municipal government? Are we going to be Third Nations instead of First Nations? I don't get it. Or did I miss something?
Right. Right. Do you have any questions, Kevin?
Yeah. Hey, Roland. So in my research too, that I found a lot of what policy analysts and lawyers and fellow researchers have found is that we're going to be referred to as like a fourth level of government. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, did Trudeau not say that Indigenous peoples were the fourth level of government?
Yeah, we will never achieve the goals of our forefathers and our former leaders until there's an Indian process, a treaty process with the federal government. People are kidding themselves when they sit together with the federal government and provincial governments. All the powers, you take the powers in gaming, are delegated powers since the federal government bought the gaming rights from provinces back a number of years ago, and that delegated power for gaming, as an example, is a good agreement, but it's an agreement for them and the provinces. Those delegated powers should be as an interim period where those delegated powers should come directly to our Indian bands rather than to the province, and then delegated to us by the province. And until there's a true Indian process, an Indian design process, a treaty process, we are going to get no place but go further and further behind in regards to the treaty promises.
Yes, and And just kind of touch back on some of these agreements. And I've read them. You almost have to be a lawyer, a policy analyst, and basically like a Swiss Army knife of titles to understand these the languages in them. But the parts that I've read, and the parts that I understand, and the parts that have been explained to me, I found that there's always whenever you sign like a contract, it's like you get that little asterisk with subject to terms and conditions, and they always have special words and tactics involved in it. And some of the language they use in those contracts is like just for instance, like they say that a budget can change, and if the budget changes, then there's no guarantee. There's just a lot of like little things in there, and I'm sure with the TLE, I have not read the TLE. A friend is actually going to loan me an original copy because he says that he was part of that process as well on council. So I'm looking forward to getting my hands on an original copy, and because it's like you say, that's how you understood it. And and I've seen pictures with Chrétien and former leaders, and I just understand this is all a process and all that. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is like I don't understand like how the leaders not maybe they full well understand what they're getting themselves into, but anybody else that was to read that and understand the language used in those contracts, they would run as fast and as far as they can.
Yeah. If you look and read the book Land is Everything has the entire TLE agreement in it, and the Treaty Commissioner's office doesn't give them out anymore because I think they realized they were negligent, because the TLE agreement is being changed by policy quietly and silently and methodically to keep us from obtaining our 1.5 million acres and also mineral rights to a great degree. Now, when you look at that, it's the negligence on our part, the FSIN, our chiefs, and the Treaty Commissioner. But if you ever get your hands on that book, I'm trying to get mine back. I had one. I think it's the only one in captivity in Saskatchewan. And when I forgot to mention, when I first sat down in the early days of politics and Chief of the Federation, I said to then the Minister of Indian Affairs, Bill McKnight, and I said, we want our land back. We've been waiting 116 years for it. And he said, Chief, I don't know if we can do that because there's no mechanism. I sat back in my chair and I said, I thank you, Minister. That's the best thing I've ever heard, because if there was a process in place, we'd get screwed again. We want this to be an Indian process, a treaty process between us and the federal government. Nobody else. So they're changing the TLE agreement, I repeat myself, silently and quietly, and the chiefs don't realize their agreement is being changed by policy, not by agreement. The other thing, if you look at the 10-year agreements they're signing today with the chiefs and councils, if these were treaty agreements, they would last for as long as the treaties. Any province, any government who makes a commitment to Indians for sunset, with a sunset clause in there, are thieves and liars, because our treaties don't have a sunset clause.
Well, no, neither do our Aboriginal rights, right? So, I mean, people have to include both of those in a powerful way, I think, and that brings people even in unceded, areas that don't have never made a treaty with the Crown.
Well, we all have rights, and the biggest thing we got to protect is our treaty rights, and our leaders are not there. They are not there, and I've said it in Chiefs Assembly. I've upset a number of people, but quite frankly, do I look like I give a shit? It's the truth.
There's a question here. The Prairie Treaty Nations Alliance separated from the AFN in 1985, and Roland Crowe led them back into AFN in 1989.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you, I hope I'm not taking too much time, but I'll give you a quick overview.
Yeah, we have all the time in the world. This is the place where we air everything. No time limits on Standing Bear Network.
The PTNA was really a group of the three prairie provinces of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. However, the government was not going to fund PTNA. So I approached Bill McKnight again. While I'm talking about Bill McKnight, you know, Liberals and NDPs have promised us for decades on Treaty of Land and Entitlements. But it was the good heart of Grant Devine, who was a Conservative Premier in Saskatchewan, Bill McKnight and Mulroney, who gave us Treaty of Land and Entitlements. They were the only ones who fulfilled the treaties, in my view. Now, when we go back to PTNA, they end up funding PTNA through the FSIN. And the reason is we couldn't seem to get enough of a grip with PTNA, and quite frankly, in all due respect, there was somewhat floundering in certain areas in the protection of treaties. And we were out of the AFN, but the reason I went back to the AFN was FSIN, and I'm very straightforward about it, is the AFN chiefs and Mercury wanted me to wait for TLE in Saskatchewan till all the band, so it would be a national program. And I said, AFN has stumbled. I'm not waiting. Saskatchewan's going to move ahead. And what Ovid was doing is he was trying to destroy the TLE agreement with the federal ministers and federal cabinet. So that's why we went back into AFN, so as I could keep Ovid away from the table and not wreck our TLE agreement. That was the only single reason we went back into the AFN, is to protect the territory and agreement that we had agreed to with the federal government. And those were during the Oka crisis. Those were really, really difficult days. But I remember the Oka crisis as if it was yesterday. But while that was going on, we were successful with Treaty of Land and Entitlements in Saskatchewan.
Kevin, do you have, would you like to respond?
Yes. So Roland, then, you know, it's like you said, the original agreement, and you said it's being changed through policy. Like, in the original agreement, was it ever, you said it wasn't agreed, like the minerals and stuff, right? Like, if, you know, some people speak of treaties and different treaties, and there was different, but they all have an underlying theme, is that we agreed to share the land, not give it away. And yeah, it's
just it was very clear that it was a treaty agreement, and the federal government agreed that it was a treaty agreement. That's why it's titled Treaty of Land and Entitlement. And there were several discussions and difficult discussions, but we went back as far as data per survey to get quantum. And if you look at quantum, there was quite a split in politics in Saskatchewan, because I wanted the Bill C-31s head count to be there for their 128 acres, or a section for every family of 5. And some people thought that was a mistake, but I didn't think so, because it was not us who took their land away from them when they disenfranchised. It was the federal government, so they owed our Bill C-31s their entitlement to land.
Kevin?
Okay, then so when they began all these policy changes, like I think it was the last interview that you had with and Saul was a guest on it as well. He made mention of Saskatchewan, and you see all these things coming up in the news about like trespassing laws, and you also hear about there's apparently the government of Saskatchewan is putting out a tender for the sale of water. And that's if anybody's ever flown over Saskatchewan, it's complete, like it's just bodies of water, of fresh water, and water is life, and I just don't I don't think that would have been in the agreement, would it?
No, it wasn't in the agreement. And the other thing, if you look at the 1930 transfer agreement, it clearly is in the transfer agreement that Crown lands, unoccupied Crown lands, federally, provincially, and the PFRA pastures that they're selling now, which are, in my opinion, unoccupied Crown lands. The 1930 transfer agreement states very clearly in section 10 and 12 that we have the right to and we're supposed to be kept intact till all treaty entitlements were fulfilled. But again, the FSI and the Treaty Commissioner's Office have fallen asleep, and so is our chiefs.
So you're saying that, like, because someone, some it's like a buyer seller basis or something along those lines, and but it's almost like we had the first right of refusal, did we not? Is that what you're saying?
It's not really the right of first of first refusal. Those lands are ours. So
Yes.
we don't have to have first right of refusal. They're selling stolen land. But nobody in the FSI and or the chiefs are prepared to use the language of the province selling stolen lands. I can't go out to my non-Indian neighbors and go and sell their land. I'd be in jail. And the province is doing it right under our noses, and the politicians aren't saying or doing a damn thing. That's why I resigned from the FSI Senate, because I can't live with those kinds of arrangements. I just can't do it. I got to live with myself more than anything else.
Now, Roland, a question came in. Ask him how he feels about getting money from treaty land entitlement specific claims and having to buy back land with that money. He says he was the first to accept money to buy land back in the 80s, as I understand it.
That's right. And we had the option, and the federal government tried to sell that option to us. He said, well, Indian Affairs and the federal government will purchase the land. So I said, the last time you guys done that, you stole half of it, and then the other half we never got in regards to your promises. Why in the hell would I ever let the federal government purchase lands for us when they screwed it up last time? I said, there's no way in hell I'm trusting this to government to purchase land for us. You guys will steal half of it before it gets to us and sell it to your friends, just like the late 1800s, early 1900s, when they were taking big portions of land and their friends were buying it under the table. I don't agree with that. If it's going to be a process, it's going to be a treaty process, and it's going to be an process. What did they do to us? What did they do to us last time they handled our lands? They stole half of it, if not more. What did they do to our children when they were in custody of them? They pillaged them, they raped them, and some of them died, and they hid the graves so nobody could ever see where some of our past generations went. I'm going to trust them with land or children. I'd have to be drunk or high on something to agree to that.
You know, I'm looking online and I see a chart for the framework agreement of the First Nations Land Management Act. Maybe you guys can see too.
See, the other thing, if I can jump in, that agreement states very clearly that any time a treaty entitlement ban selects land for the specific claims and or PLE, that they are supposed to put a freeze on it immediately, including mineral rights. But again, the chiefs are letting them get away with that. There's a 90-day turnaround from the day you select a land, and if you don't have it in reserve status within 90 days, with the ban leading the process, you can start billing them for loss of revenue, a way of life, and a loss of our many of those lands have medicinal purposes. And now a lot of our people can't go on there and collect the roots and herbs for medicinal purposes. The elders told me at the beginning of land adoption regime, get all the land you can. Don't worry about the quality of the land, because there'll come a time that, again, that those are going to be our pharmacies. So that's why we selected all kinds of land. It may not look productive for cattle grazing. In some cases, yes. It may not look good for cultivation, but that was our pharmacies. And I repeat myself when I say pharmacies.
So, Roland, just had a question about that. So, between the varying treaties, if you took Treaty 10, for example, because I've begun to started reading the journals of those treaty assassins or commissioners or whatever you want to call them. But that's one thing that they kept excellent documentation about the process, and one of the things wasn't it like every treaty territory, I guess you could say, had different acreages per family of 5. I think 240. I've heard like I think you said 128, and wasn't it up in Treaty 10? I believe it was 640 acres per a family 5. I don't know if you'd be able to correct me if I'm wrong about that.
And there's no sunset clause on the treaty agreements, but these 10-year agreements have a sunset clause. And I wish all of us a good, long life, but we'll never see these kinds of financial arrangements for 10 years. There isn't a hope in hell. They're going to start changing those agreements, and the chiefs and councils are going to have absolutely nothing to say because they agreed to the 10-year agreements. And at the same time, this land management thing is just a backroom, under the table way of taking our traditional lands and moving our own band members off the lands that they were raised on.
Roland would. Sorry about that. Touch on that one point you made about something coming up real soon, like we have to renew it. I'm not familiar with that clause. You
Sorry?
said in a year or two.
No, I didn't get that. I'm sorry.
Kevin? You still there?
Oh, hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it's quite loud here. So that you said that Roland, you said there was a clause or there was a stipulation coming up, and it was going to happen within a year or two, like 2023 or something like that. Is there something that you said there's something we have to renew or we'll lose it, right? I think that's something everybody should be aware of.
You are exactly right.
And I guess a couple of things that I'd like to say is through this whole research process that I've been on, and it's just I've been finding nations memberships are just totally unaware of what's going on, and and I guess things like initiatives like this, and it's almost like we got to find like a GPS, a grassroots path to sovereignty, and just because it seems like we're lost. It seems like we're lost because we don't remember the teachings from before, and what the land is to us, because it's every day you see in the news, like they're arguing about that case in Quebec with the child family law and stuff like that. So it's just never ending, and I guess we just need to keep doing these info sessions and just getting the information out there, because there's so many of our people that don't realize what's going on.
Well, if I can jump in, I think what is necessary is all of the bands that are in this 10-year agreement should be publicized, and their chiefs and council should be on the list of the ones who agreed on a 10-year funding agreement. We gotta leave for our future generations, who were the ones who helped the federal government steal our lands and our rights and our children, and steal the future from us. And I say that openly and honestly.
Roland?
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah.
So, in more of my research, I love research, but so there's a lot of cases, and a lot of people refer back to them. The Delgamuuk case, and not really a lawyer, but there's like 3 cases, and there's also another case coming up in British Columbia. I think it's actually in the courts right now, and it basically goes back to James Cook, that explorer. So what they subpoenaed his diaries, and he said that I've been all over the world, and he said he could take whatever he wanted wherever he went, until he came up to the lands here on Turtle Island here, and he discovered that there was people there that weren't so willing and ready to give up their title, and they're like, hey, that's our grass, so they staked claim to it. They understood the value of the land and the underlying title to it, and I think that's what that's what the people across Turtle Island need to start realizing, is that it's almost like we're the last thing standing in the way of total and complete control, because you see all these mines. There's I'm just kind of jumping all over the place, but it's just the best way to explain what I'm trying to say, I guess, is we just need to start waking everybody up, and that's what I've been doing, is just raising awareness. And I think everybody that's taken the time to inform everybody of what's really happening, because it's just not happening at the the band council level, right? So it's quite unfortunate that and I believe there was a prophecy that it would be our own people to dismantle the treaties, and it sure sounds and looks like that's how it's going right now.
You are absolutely right. There's a sleeping giant out there, and because of people like you, we're going to wake that sleeping giant, and that sleeping giant is band members. Because the information is being withheld from them. Anytime that there's major agreements, they should use the information and be accurate about the information. There's a term we call, what do we call it? The duty to consult. But our own chiefs and councils aren't using the duty to consult.
You're 100% correct, and it's just
When was the last time a chief and council had an open forum with its membership to tell them exactly the conditions of the funding agreements on those 10-year funding agreements? I've never seen one in my reserve. They sign it in some dark corner with a federal government Indian agent.
yeah, and that was one of the stipulations in, if I remember that funding agreement, it's 160 some odd pages long, and it's quite extensive in the language it uses. But one thing it said in there was a nation, if they're going to address that, you know, if they're going to announce that that agreement, that Canada would be that would like to participate and do a joint announcement. But it's like you said, nobody has said anything, so I guess it's not that important to band members in their eyes, I guess. But I guess we'll just keep sharing the information and getting it out there, and it's just almost like a puzzle. Everybody's just putting together the information, and they're going to see the whole picture. And once they see it, they're going to see what's been going on, because there's been many nations that there's been radio silence about this.
Yeah, if I could jump in for a minute, like when we done treaty land entitlement,
Yeah.
there was band meetings to explain the process of TLE. And it was a requirement in order for TLE to be signed by that band that there had to be a referendum or a vote to enter into TLE negotiations at certain conditions that the band membership would be kept informed.
Do people, I'm sorry, I was just going to ask, do people understand the sense of urgency that that they are literally giving up their Aboriginal rights and title to the land?
It's not Aboriginal. It's, in our case, it's not Aboriginal rights. It's our treaty rights.
But not everybody had treaties with the Crown.
I know that, but in many cases, the Aboriginal rights follow the treaty rights.
Yeah, so they would go hand in hand.
We have lands that are ours and protected, but I have no qualms with the Aboriginal people. But many times, if the Aboriginal people got all of the things that are promised under treaty, like health issues, education, all of those things, we'd all be in a better world. That's just my opinion. But you're going to see in these 10-year agreements that the funding is going to be shorted for education, post-secondary, infrastructure for schools, infrastructure for post-secondary buildings, and it's not going to be there for health. There's going to be a prescribed amount given to Indian bands, and if they don't have enough money, there's not a damn thing they can do about it. You're going to see people without proper health support, talk about debt care, and all of those other things, and hygiene.
Roland?
Yeah.
So I guess to touch on that a little bit is when I kind of skimmed through that 10-year funding agreement, 10-year funding agreement, I guess what they've done and kind of how they bottled it up and presented it is that you're receiving money for I don't know, like 8 to 11 different functions, and I think you've named off quite a few of them just now. And while it looks good on the surface, you know, you get a lot of money right up front, right? But then you pay back with interest, and the interest is shortages of funding. I mean, if we're going the municipal government route, if that's the way they intend to, you know, the elected officials of the First Nations, if that's the way they're going, you know, municipalities are being chronically underfunded anyway. So how are we benefiting like that? Why are we using that model? And it just doesn't make sense. You know, it's just totally ridiculous. You know, in my opinion, that what they're doing.
You're absolutely right. You are absolutely right.
You know, we've been talking about this a lot with Russell Daibo and Roland Panguish. You know, people who've been in the game for a long time, like you, Roland. And you know, what they're telling us is that, you know, things like from a UN, you know, standpoint, Canada's greatest human rights problems stem from how, you know, the land management. And you know, Roland Panguish has talked about how, you know, once you know, these bilateral mechanisms are put in place, you know, which are the three national Indigenous organizations, right? Because the you know, the Trudeau government is taking this pan-Indigenous approach, which is another conversation. But you know, at these negotiating tables, you know, we have these things like the treaty land management, and you know, the intention is to turn it into fee simple, right? Divide it up, create a land code, and tax it. And
That's right.
one of the things that Roland said is that, you know, pretty soon you're going to hear about human rights violations because there are people starving up in the bush. You know,
Yeah.
and do people understand a sense of urgency? You know, with respect to these land policies that are replacing treaty, and where is the duty to consult?
Yeah, they violated the duty to consult as a federal government. Our own people are violating the duty to consult with their own people.
What successful efforts have you seen, or do you maybe see being implemented, you know, where our communities can hold our people more accountable, which aren't our people? I mean, these are corporations we're talking about, right? We don't talk about you know, like the FSIN is now the FSI Inc., right?
Right.
So how do we get our communities, you know, to, all right, let's look at it this way. When you go on some of these reserves, chief and council is the only economic game in town. So it's controlled by a lot of families. There's a lot of arguing, fighting. The despair is such, you know, because our people are dying exponentially by way of suicide. You know, there was a state of emergency called back in 2016, you know, when 6 of our youth died in a period of 2 months. And 140 people were on suicide watch. This despair is increasing exponentially. We have Manitoba Hydro, and this is about all the territories where all these, you know, all this resource extraction and usage and mining is going on. There's no drinking water. People don't even have proper sewage. The food prices are 3-4 times what you would expect. The Manitoba hydro bills are astronomical. And all of that energy is exported to the South, even into the United States, Minneapolis and Minnesota. There was one semi-successful attempt. I mean, it was a good attempt. They were able to, they occupied GenPeg and, the Nelson River. It's the first hydro dam which controls the outflows from Lake Winnipeg. And so there's like 9 other generating stations along that river. So what Isidore Papanicus told me is that it was the quickest the minister ever showed up.
On clean drinking water.
What's that?
There should be no ban in this country without good drinking water because we didn't pollute the damn water. Because prior to European settlement, we didn't have drinking water problems. It was them who made a disaster of our drinking water. So why do we have to beg and plead to get clean drinking water? We had that before they came here.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's our people are in such a state that they lack political will because they're hurting. Where are our leaders?
I'll tell you where we are at the band level. The band members are absolutely scared to say anything. And the reason they're scared is for vindictiveness, because when a band member complains, suddenly their kids don't get picked up on time, their water delivery doesn't happen, their roads don't get cleared, their sewer pump out doesn't get done. So that's the vindication of peace and council on how they keep band members quiet. And I understand that. I live over there.
Right. Kevin, do you have something you'd like to ask or add?
Yes, yes, Roland. So I guess when I've spoken to fellow membership and just a lot of people, like I've been pretty busy. I think I work at least 20 to 21 hours a day every day for the past since September. And there's a big misconception that when they announced initiative land back, but they didn't say and describe what the land back was. They're giving control over to councils of the little tiny reserves, and I'll quote someone when they said we have 0.2% landmass in reserves across Canada. So, and they're marketing the First Nation Land Management Act as as like collateral. So, council can use that to buy, sell, and use as collateral for financial transactions. Because I think there was a paper put out that the government said that reserves were locked, because you couldn't use them. So that's the way that they're marketing this as a business tactic. But it may benefit some bands, especially where there's large populations. But for bands out in the bush, I cannot wrap my head around what they're thinking in terms of how are you going to get economic development out in the bush with the Financial Land Management Act? And we have such, we're just so chronically underfunded as is that, so they're using it like collateral, and they're also using it as, okay, you have the land now, and they're giving taxation powers now to council. And I found documentation relating to that. So how, are we going to start, are you going to start taxing poor people? I just don't understand the logic in that. Where's the head at? Where's put your thinking cap on and just take a step back and look at it from someone that's impoverished. Poverty, that's the number one driver, I think, of it's a lot of the source of the problems is just poverty, because what do you do when you have nothing?
Roland?
Yeah, well, if you look at it and you stand back and look at it, the biggest problem in Indian country today is the lack of carrying out the treaty agreements and Aboriginal agreements, call them whatever you want. But the simple fact is it's an economic war. And as the treaty said that we were going to share, you look at the tax base that people say were a burden to the taxpayers, that is a fallacy. If you look at the early development of this country, there was no taxes to individuals. It was during the war that they put the tax scheme in place, and that people accuse us of living off taxpayers. But we got our treaty monies before there was a tax base, and that came out of the amalgamated funding, which the industry and the things paid for the running of the country prior to the world conflicts. So our monies are not supposed to come from taxpayers. Those are supposed to come from the wealth of the land, and as the treaties say, that we're supposed to share equally. It's an economic war that's at our doorstep, and people aren't waking up.
Just to kind of tie into what you're saying, Roland, so is it not, and wasn't it agreed upon in the treaties that the lands would be held in trust? Now, if you break down that word, that means, okay, it's like I guess it's like a minor, when you hold money for a minor until they become of age, then they get to have it. So isn't that suggestive of saying that we're almost subsidizing the country on the resources of the traditional territories of the nations across the country?
Well, let me just sum it up quickly. We were supposed to be equal partners. So whatever the country of Canada gets from all of those mineral resources and all kinds of other resources, we are supposed to be equal partners in there to get our sustenance from those agreements. But the federal government and the provinces have stepped in and they're reaping all the benefits. Where's ours?
I would say this, if I may interject, is I don't see this as an economic war. I see this as a war on our inalienable rights. And I don't know that people realize that there is a protection that we have under the Crown, which insulates us from the fluctuation of a precarious market. And once these lands are chopped up into fee simple and given the land code and the ability as a corporation to invest in the market economy and lease out lands, and if those bills aren't paid, guess who gets the land, right? The lender, whoever the.
No, we don't have to invest. That is equally ours as it is the federal government. And they make us poor and dependent on them because we've been left out of the economic cycle. How many people my age and older than me that have passed on worked all their lives in no pension plan? That's an economic war, my friend.
Here's a question. Aren't inalienable, what was I going to say? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please finish your thought.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
We've been out of the economic cycle, the employment cycle for far too many years, and we've been left out of the riches of this land because of the greed of the non-Indian people and non-Indian governments. Now, some of our own chiefs and councils have adapted to that kind of understanding. And today it's all money, not rights, and guaranteed rights for as long as the river flows, the sun shines, and the river flows.
Now, aren't Aboriginal rights intrinsically collective rights?
That's right.
And so it does, it becomes.
But how are the collective rights when only the chief and council decide on agreements? That's not collective rights.
But that was an intended mechanism, right?
We might as well be Russia, for Christ's sake.
Right. Right. Kevin? Kevin, you still?
Yeah, I'm still there. Sorry, just it's just cutting out. Sorry about that. So I think what needs to be understood by the membership and you know, the First Nation, like the individuals themselves, is they need to understand what's happening, and they need to understand the sense of urgency, and just start passing the information out there. When I started, you know, getting the information out there, there was outrage because they didn't they didn't understand what it meant. But, you know, now there's a lot of people that are waking up to the idea that, and it's right there online, you know, being corporations, they have to publish that information, eh? So I'm pretty thankful that at least they published it, because otherwise no one would have found out about it. I think Roland Panguish himself, he didn't, I believe he said in a previous interview on the Standing Bear Network that he didn't discover it until they started putting out a land vote. And he was like, what is this? And he's like, no, not so fast. So, you know, I think that's what we need to have we need to start waking up the people and just realize what's at stake. And, you know, if, you know, we have such a kinship to the land, and we need to realize that we've almost forgotten our ways and, you know, what it means. You know, and it's like, it just needs to start waking up the people. That's the biggest thing.
Let me read briefly. This is an act further to amend the Indian Act of 1880. And it says, an act for conferring certain privileges on the more advanced bands of Indians of Canada with the view of training them for the exercise of municipal powers. What people are saying is, you know, this is the fulfillment of the Indian Act. And Roland Panguish said, my God, you know, they've finally done it. They've been working at this for 30 years. And I mean, you know, of course it was much earlier than that, but you know, it accelerated, you know, with the white papers, with the Buffalo Jump, inadvertently, even during the patriation of the Constitution with Section 35. And then within the past 6 years, it's extremely accelerated, you know, in the form of these, what the government is calling permanent bilateral mechanisms, in the form of the three, you know, Indigenous organizations. So, yeah, so I think we're living in frightening times. I think Kevin and I, we've been monitoring people, and people are coming together. They have really good questions, and people are organizing. And I want to thank you guys, you know, both, because we need collective wisdom. We need people coming together to decide how we're going to address these things on a national level. I just want to briefly say, I'm not going to end the feed, but I want to briefly say that you know, Standing Bear Network, we've been at this for a while now. We have an educational series up, which is called Decolonizing Canada. We might change that to exercising our rights to sovereignty and self-determination or something. But anyway, we have great people up there like Russ Daibo, Roland Panguish, Isidore Papanicus from Pemigewasset territory, Thomas Monius, and of course now Roland Crowe, former senator and FSIN chief. You know, thank you for your presence and for, you know, our intention is to elevate those voices that are going to help empower our grassroots communities that are really struggling with these things, right? Kevin, do you?
Yeah, you're welcome. And let me say this and quote it.
Yeah.
If our people don't wake up before long, all our lands are going to be encumbered by the lending agencies, because every time they make an agreement, they encumber our lands, and we're going to be seeing our lands disappear before our eyes, because if they default in those lands, those encumbrances on that land are going to remain there forever until they're paid back. So it's been a pleasure working with you, and I wish you as well.
Oh, many blessings. Thank you so much, Roland. Hi.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, Tom, next time.
Many blessings. So Kevin, I still got you there?
Yep.
Okay, so I think that was a wonderful conversation. What are your final thoughts? You have some thoughts that you have regarding the conversation, or maybe questions that have come to you by way of the community?
Yeah, I just want to, just to say that, we need to get the information out there. We need to start getting together. We have to start empowering the women, because if you look back, as the women that were an integral part, they're the life givers of our communities. And we need to start, waking them up and having a voice, find their voice and start speaking it, because, we're running out of time. We're almost in a race here, and we're underfunded. We're outgunned. But you know what? One thing I will say is, one thing we have to remember is, who signed the treaties long ago? They didn't even speak the same language. They didn't understand the written language, but they understood what they needed to do because they had direction.
Right.
We need to find our direction.
Yeah, and it's not like our people didn't know how to make treaties. We were making treaties for a long time. We were the experts. Not everything was intended. There were always elements that weren't included, unlike the colonial understanding, where it was almost a tool of subjugation. So these are complicated things. One of the things I was thinking about with respect to the treaties, and for as long as the sun shines and the grass grows and the water flows, that water that's spoken of, that's the embryonic fluid that surrounds the baby. Are women are life givers. This was a reference to the generations and generations that come and that follow. So when we think about the laws of creator, the intent of the treaties, when we think about our traditional people that have walked in prayer and ceremony, and in most cases poverty their entire lives, they come to us and they tell us, these are the stories that we have heard, and this is our way. Informed by sacred teachings. It was treaties. The first treaties were peace and friendship treaties, and that exemplifies sort of the disposition of Indigenous people at the time of the colonizers. One thing, Lolly Hokwats, a wonderful elder I met over in Treaty 2 territory. We discussed sovereignty, and reign. It comes from the Latin words "reign sover," right? To reign over somebody. All this colonial terminology. When the colonists came, the relationship was, who's the boss now? But for Indigenous people, it was, who are you? How might I be related to you? And would you like to trade? And it was because all of life was a network of relationships. our relationship to the earth, to Mother Earth, you know, to the four-legged, the two-legged, the winged, things that swim and crawl. So very, very different perception. This is something that Roland Panguish, you know, brought up strongly. Was you know, the understanding in those treaties. Kevin?
Yep.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, I have. I just have basically a request.
Okay.
So in all of this that's happening, we're starting to see people begin to start speaking up, and it's few and far between. You know, Indigenous representation speaking up on this matter. They need to start speaking up.
Right. Yeah, so many blessings to you guys. I want to thank you for joining us. I'm going to just keep this. If you have to go, Kevin, that's fine, but I'm going to keep this going, and or we can continue to have a conversation, because I think these are important things to talk about. You know, a lot of people don't realize that there's, you know, the Indian Act of Canada wasn't the first. The first laws that were designed to manage Indians began in the early 1500s with Spain creating the first, you know, codes, you know, to manage the Indians, you know, in the Caribbean, right, Taino territory. These were the first codes that were put into place, and it unilaterally gave authority to those colonizing settlers authority over Indians. In other words, it created Indian agents. They were the first Indian agents, and they subjugated and enslaved people. And of course, all of these things, you know, were invoked by the doctrine of discovery, right? And not just in 1993, there were a series of papal bulls that came out, including Terra Nullius, Vega and Land, which talked about, you know, people could just go, if you were not Christian, you know, you could go onto other lands and territories, claim it as your own, because the people there, you know, were essentially animals. And that has informed policy throughout Portugal, you know, Britain and Spain, France, you know, parts of Africa, all over the place. I mean, this is what colonization is all about. You know, where does that final authority come from? And what it comes from is essentially a legal fiction, you know, and all of colonial common law evokes the doctrine of discovery. This is why you won't hear the Pope give an apology, because in the midst of the time, you know, when the British North American Act was put into place, and the Indian Act, guess what was going on in between there? That's when the doctrine of infallibility was put into play, what they called ex cathedra. When the Pope spoke from the chair, he was considered to be infallible. So for the Pope to evoke the doctrine of discovery really strikes at the heart of not only papal authority and integrity, but also crown authority and integrity. And these things are, you know, that the white paper, or the 69 white papers, you know, that was really the catalyst, you know, for what we're seeing in the modern era. It was the catalyst for people coming together, because this was the intention. Everything that we see going on right now, this was the intention, to turn our people into fourth level ethnic municipalities, you know, under the lowest federal or provincial municipality. You know, we'd be down there somewhere. Turn our lands into fee simple. This is why we have checkerboard reserves, because you know, there are lands that were leased and they were foreclosed on, and the lender got the land, This is what we've seen go on throughout the colonization of the states down here as well. I mean, this has been the intention, not to acknowledge Aboriginal, inalienable Aboriginal rights, which means you don't dictate to me what those rights are. What it means is I will serve notice to you who I am. And this is the message we're trying to get to people: is remember who you are as an Indigenous person. Remember the strength that comes from knowing who it is you are. This is why breaking up the families was so important for the Crown and federal governments, because if people can trace back their lineage, and it would be much more difficult to program people. And that's what the residential schools were all about. They were programming. The residential schools were really a tip of the iceberg within the Indian Act. And now what we see going on is the fulfillment, what many people have called the fulfillment of the Indian Act, complete assimilation as fourth level ethnic municipalities. So, yeah, does anybody have any questions out there? I'm trying to monitor them. Do you have any, Kevin?
Questions? No, not. I just enjoyed discussing. I think I found my passion. Since I started in September, I've been pretty passionate about this, and I just cannot let go of the idea that things need to change. Things need to change, because how can we keep doing the same thing expecting different results? We can't. There's no way we can do that. It's just not. It's when I explain something, and when I try to like, just say for my children, for example, when they don't get a lesson, they don't understand something, and I was like, look, you just keep hurting yourself. You just keep hurting yourself. It's like let's just say there's a prickly bush there or whatever. Say, oh, don't touch that. Stay away from it. It's not good. And then you go ahead and do it. The first time's okay, it's okay. So do it again. And you keep doing it, and you keep doing it. We can't keep just repeating the same mistakes. We got to learn from them. And I guess that's where I say that change needs to happen, and it needs to happen in a good way, because it's just long time coming that the people need to wake up. And throughout the different nations across Turtle Island, there's prophecies that are coming. They say that our mother Earth is changing. It's changing right before our eyes. And they say I've heard like the seventh generation, and I hear that we are in that generation now. And you can see just all the things happening across the world, all over the world, and it's just I think it's time that we need to wake up, realize what's going on, and begin to change it, because if not, it'll be too late. And it's just a learning process. It's like anything else. When I started in September, I was an infant. Now I'm a toddler now, just learning about these things. And I have great teachers. I really do have great teachers, and I thank them.
Yeah.
And I guess that's just my kids are tired of hearing me talk about this. But I think this should be a class, and you need to understand where we came from. Like, well, how did this happen? How did we get to where we are? Right? You have to have a starting point, and you have to know where you're going. That's why I refer back to that GPS concept. Grassroots path to sovereignty, and in any language you use it, we need to find our way. We need to find our way, because we're lost, and the ones that are supposed to lead us are getting us even more lost. And the people need to speak up about that, because it's not them that delegate their own authority. They have to be voted in, even if that is a colonial construct. They still have to be voted in by the population, right? And you hear different people talk about different subjects, and it's like you go back to, like, say, the clan system and the ancient governance systems and stuff like that. How many nations remember their traditional governance. Not many, the whole Indian Act thing was it was very successful in what it tried to accomplish, but it didn't. It's just like when you write on a piece of paper and you try to erase it. There's just that little bit that's left. That's what we have now. We just have to, reaffirm what was in the writing before we encountered all of this nonsense. But maybe I'm just babbling on, but I just feel it, and I just feel it that we're on the right path, and we just got to bring as many people with us.
Yeah, I mean, I've called this the Constitution Express too. We have a right to exist, and who are these people today that think that they could circumvent the decisions of our heroes and our leaders and all those great people, that helped to guide our people throughout millennia. I mean, we're talking colonization is just a little tiny window of time, and we've been here for like that. I've seen petroglyphs, the petroglyphs, over in Cross Lake. And when I go to Cross Lake, it's a very simple community. It's very impoverished. The people love the land, and they're such a loving people. But there is this lull of economic despair, that's, and it's more than that. It's like what Arthur Manuel talked about, the dispossession leads to dependency, which leads to oppression. And these are imposed systems of impoverishment. These are imposed systems, mechanisms of impoverishment that began even before the Indian Act, but many people can keep that as a point of reference in their head. As a time, when Arthur Manuel explains it very well, that the reserves were put in place basically for the protection of Indians until such time as they were ready to be assimilated into the body politic. That's the exact same Indian Act of the early 1500s. It's the same one. It's the same one. So remember, when we're talking about 530 years of near genocidal extinction at the hands of colonialism, it does start with our people, Taino people. I am Taino, Provincia Kamak. I got family, down there and up north. But both my grandmas were from Puerto Rico. And I had a wonderful conversation with my mother about some of these things. And, when people are that are literally first contact. I mean, that is where it all began. It's a miracle, that our people have survived, but we do survive. We live. And Taino to Pimicikamak, we stand in solidarity against these racist doctrines of discovery that inform racist policies, that are designed simply to manipulate us into becoming fourth level ethnic municipalities. All of these land agreements, these are all created by these, what Trudeau calls bilateral mechanisms. They are designed to take you take the last things that you have, release the crown of its fiduciary obligation. It's not going to exist anymore. You're going to be thrown into the world, of this precarious economic market that's out there. Okay, some of our people are gonna get involved in investments. Some of them are gonna think they're gonna be real good at it, but there are communities now that have even in urban centers, they're having their regrets at this point. I can only just imagine what's going to happen to our people out in the bush. I mean, I get messages all the time. And Kasaman Thomas Monius, he has pancreatic cancer. He's my mentor. He's one of the last, and speaks English as a second language. And he has stood up for the rights and sovereignty of his people for so long, and he's watched, these, chief and band councils usurp their authority over people, without the duty to consult, acting as mechanisms. What a corporation is a mechanism of the, it's a mechanism of the province. It's what's known as sort of dictated authority. This is what they're interpreting as being our right to self-government. Is the authority dictated by the provinces.
It's just funny that that's the title of it, because it's like, how can you call it self-government when it's predetermined for you? You break down that word, you break it down into simple terms, and it's like self, that's not, you're yourself, you decide. And then, government, well, how are you going to structure, that format? And it's just like, well, self-government, well, it's kind of predetermined for you. And there's special words and tactics. I love that terminology, but SWAT, right? So it's like, the rights and the rights of a natural person, and then you start breaking that down, that terminology down, and it's just like, well, you're just a corporation, you're just, by way of terminology, you're just diminishing your capacity as a nation, and that it's just quite unfortunate that that we're even going down this road. And one thing I will say is like, one thing I will say is it's just we need more leaders to step up, because one thing I asked one of our teachers was, where are the leaders of that fought the white paper with the red paper, the Constitution Express. I always look back on those videos, and I use that as a kind of like a flashlight in the dark kind of thing, try to find my way, navigate this this whole process of what we're going through and stuff, and it's just like, where are the leaders of that time? Well, they're they've either passed on to the spirit world, or they're getting old. We can't always be warriors and fight to the when we're in our old age, right? Like, so it's just like the oral history from before. You pass on that information so that you can do something with it. And I think that we need to learn from our teachers now and start implementing that, because it's I think it's getting lost. It is getting lost. We need to find our way.
Right. I mean, we're good. This all goes back to Section 35 and the interpretation of it, and it essentially puts all of our rights to self-government into a box of delegated authority, and then of course it's imposed through bilateral mechanisms, which means the three Indigenous organizations, federal, national Indigenous organizations, which becomes the first line of defense, and for the crime, and for these final the irony here is that this began with Pierre Trudeau back in '69, and so it's his son is actually fulfilling what his father had started. His father started that with Jean Chrétien, right? Chrétien, and there was an uproar when they first introduced those '69 white papers, and it was put to an end. But secretly, it was implemented. It was implemented in the form of land claims and self-government agreements. Just when people thought that during the patriation of the Constitution that our rights would be protected, well, now suddenly it's enshrined, under a federal policy dictating delegated authority. So I don't know that our people understand these things. I don't know that they understand what it means to turn lands into fee simple, because what it does is causes them to what they do is they put a price on it and they tax it, and they add land codes, and so it's regulated in some way. But the minute you do something like that, it subjects it to the global market economy, and how often do we see people go, how often have we seen bands go into receivership? So all the money that the federal government is now throwing at Indigenous communities, it's not in the way of any type of real self-governance or how they're going to, they're not trying to create a banking system with Indigenous communities. That they're not helping them structure a financial model. Things that have to do with governmental infrastructure and empowering efforts with self-government. No, all these monies are going to processes, some programs and services. There's going to be some candy thrown out, and it's being done all over the place. People are taking these the quick Roland Panguish calls them the quick buck chiefs.
Yes.
Quick buck chiefs.
That's right.
So, okay. I guess we've been on for a while now. Any final words, Kevin, or anything pressing you see from our viewers?
Well, I'm not able to check on the comments section, but it's just what I see resounding in the groups and online, and it's not just a regional area that I'm reaching. I found that I'm reaching like nationally, and the next logical step would be internationally. But I guess all I can say is just people thank me for the work that I do. It's my pleasure. I'd be thanking you for listening to me, and I just no, it's not. And I always say thank you. It's the other way around, and that's the way it should be. Is we're here. I think there's a nice quote. We're here to help people, and if we can't help people, at least try not to hurt them. Give knowledge, pass it on, and then just keep that going forward. And I'm just very happy to be a part of this process, and then just getting the information out there. The pleasure is mine.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I just want people to know that Kevin is we've been working together for a little while here. And he's an organizer, he's a strategizer. He understands the complexities and the importance of combining that wealth of Indigenous wisdom and traditional knowledge with today's contemporary solutions. And I think it's it's the first that will inform the other, right? Let's not lose track of that, I think, because if all were about economics, probably all of our people would go on to take all of these benefit agreements, But I mean, think about designed to extinguish your Aboriginal rights and title, who we are as people. And don't think they're not looking at this at the global level. They are. And there's what, if you go to the United Nations, they have what's known as the Universal Periodic Review. Gotta wet my whistle. And Canada's supposed to go before them with a report, and they go over that report because they haven't always come in with a good report card. So they're being monitored, and people understand these deep issues with Indigenous communities all over the world, and there are global standards, for these things, and what's going on in Canada people like with Arthur Manuel was fighting at the World Trade Organization level regarding the proprietary interest in Aboriginal, the underlying Aboriginal title in land. And he said that Aboriginal people have been subsidizing the Canadian economy for 150 or so years. And he was acknowledged, and they accepted that, right? This is this is the largest trade tribunal, right, in the world. So it's not like people aren't paying attention. I think this is about really learning to become the initiators of our own lives. This is why I say it's so important for us to know who we are as people. We are Nahiwak. We are Ininiwak. Ininiwak is people. And Thomas Monish used to say, we were never ever nations. We were just Ininiwak. And what a beautiful understanding. I've heard many people talk about how Canada will co-opt our terms and into meaninglessness. And I think that's true. And I think it's not just in names. I think there's a lot of vocabulary that gets co-opted. Our languages, there were meanings that were very different, obviously, or I guess the treaty issues would be pretty cut and dry at this point. But okay, so Kevin, how can people connect with you and some of the efforts that you're doing with grassroots organizations?
Yeah, we'll just go back to that idea that the grassroots, and Arthur Manuel stated that as well too, that it's not going to be decided by a delegated authority, meaning Indian Act chief and council, right? But it's just we got to go back to, we just have to go back and we create a central group, and I'm very thankful that we have the opportunity to work together, and that we go so well together, and we have great conversations, and I don't know the timestamp on this conversation, but we might I don't know how long we've been running now. What do we have, 2 hours?
You know what I want to say quickly, Kevin, is for those people who are watching right now, or who commented and maybe had to leave, and maybe they'll come and refer back to this. Let me tell you, you are a unique slice of the population to even be considering these things in a deep way. You are the warriors, and we have an obligation to ourselves, to our people, and this Mother Earth. And this will impact the next 7 generations. And every moment in history has its Arthur Manuels, LaDonna Allards, Myron Deweys, Deborah Parkers, people that have been working hard for a long time. Some of them are no longer with us. If you're here, now's your time. And I'm talking to this, let's see, we have 12 people viewing right now. And I don't know how many comments, but there's quite a few. And we're going to go back to these comments. Be sure to share it out to your groups, and check out our educational segments. There's a lot of good conversations going on. Obviously, we're talking about many communities throughout Turtle Island that are being impacted, throughout First Nations, and things are going to look differently. I think our Unistoten, our Wet'suwet'en family are leading the way, along with our Secwepemc family, Tiny House Warriors over there in BC, putting their tiny houses up against that Trans Mountain pipeline, and it's been a big fight, because many of the band councils in BC, I think 46% of them have already agreed to sit at those tables, and so it's our traditional people that have become real land defenders. And they're giving us, I think, model examples on how to proceed, what it is to exercise our rights to sovereignty and self-determination. We are powerful people. It was Sol, okay, so Sol Sanderson is going to be with us tomorrow, you guys, tomorrow morning. Do you remember what time that was, Kevin?
I believe that was 11 a.m. Central Time, which translates to Saskatchewan time. And then you just go 2 hours ahead for the East Coast and 1 hour behind for Mountain and Pacific Time.
So one of the amazing things he brought up to me, and it's paradigm shifting, is that, Treaty 6 was recognized as an international treaty at the global level.
That's right.
That makes treaties 1 through 11 international treaties. And
Right.
What he said was like, that is one big, powerful medicine chest, because when you put them all together, we have to tap into those sources of power that exist. It's easy to identify the problems, it's easy to throw up the red flags, but let's empower one another. Let's be patient with one another. Let's be mindful of the layers of intergenerational trauma that our people have experienced for so long. Everybody's at varying levels of healing. Everybody's at varying levels of maturity. Many of our people are suffering from things that are the direct result of colonial imposition, that imposed system of impoverishment. Our missing and murdered Indigenous women are still going through the roof. And there was money that was promised for that, and it's not there now. So I think we need to revisit those 94 calls to action, and realize that I don't think we're going to get this done at a legislative level. I think at that point we're just reconsidering every policy, never coming to a conclusion, and all the crown and federal and provincial governments, they have all the time in the world, right? They could drag this out through court. They can apply tests, that take millions of dollars, even to do those studies, studies for those tests. We need to do studies on, where our traditional gathering places are and all these things. And it shouldn't be administered through the band councils. These monies need to go to the people that need to get out on the land and experience their culture and tradition in a personal way. Right now at jeopardy, even in our prairie territories, is the loss of land, that collective land, because remember, we have, Aboriginal rights are collective rights. This is what makes us unique as a people on Turtle Island, on this continent. And Arthur Manuel would say that white people, you're here because you have human rights, but we have rights too. This has demonstrated itself, in Canada's own Supreme Court Supreme Court rulings, and people are outraged right now. Are we done, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it was a great interview. I think it was an excellent interview, and look forward to the one tomorrow. So
really quickly, yeah, Sol Sanderson tomorrow at what time was it again? I forgot. 1 o'clock, I think. EDT. I'll post it, and be sure to check out our educational segments. I want to thank all the people that have contributed to the series, including Russ Dybo, Roland Panguish, and of course you, Kevin. You've been there. Former FSIN Chief Roland Crowe and Isidore Papanicus. People are coming together in a good way. Remember, the educational material is free for download and distribution, and it's suitable for grassroots to graduate and postgraduate people. We want to see there are a lot of Indigenous people that are informed with the law. We need you. I don't know where the Indigenous Bar Association is right now in all of this. But obviously we have to inform ourselves at the level of grassroots communities. You won't get this in academia. You know, you will not get this education in academia. And I think our greatest strength might come from just setting up some kind of teaching centers in our communities, right? A teaching center where all we do is talk about these things, these impactful things, you know, that are relevant to all the needs of our communities. You know, in our community, the housing is terrible, and you know, black mold and no running water, no sewage. Most houses don't have siding on them, and in my community, they found 84 bodies, by way of the ground-mounted sonar too. So we can use, with the finding of over 10,000 children, and I'm so glad I'm remembering and acknowledging them right now. It's a point of reference, for something, but we have to decide what that's going to be. Is it going to be sitting around waiting for an apology? That might never come. I don't see how it can, because it strikes at the very foundation of colonialism. Or are we going to be the initiators of our own lives? And what that means collectively, that's self-determination, and that was granted to us by Creator, that natural law of Creator. That's where our authority comes from. Not common law that's informed by the doctrine, the racist doctrine of discovery. Okay, so I love you guys. Again, thank you. Put more questions in the comments. Share it out to your groups. I am John Gonzalez with Standing Bear Network, Taino Pamichikamak people. Tansinina Kanipa with Wampus Kemikasimi Kwanapio. And be sure to support Indigenous journalism. We work on a shoestring with volunteers. It's a little awkward. I'm going to put my PayPal up there, but we're going to see. I have to find people that know how to do these things and put up like some kind of a GoFundMe. And I want to thank all those people that have helped contribute to the health of Thomas Monias. Be sure to give what you can. He is a traditional elder, and he's been working hard on these things for a long time. And let's strengthen our traditional forms of government. Let's be kind, love one another, and acknowledge one another in a good way. I know these things present conflict. I don't know that anger will yield the desired result, but I think being cognitive of these things, being able to articulate them in a good way, being able to teach others to articulate them in a good way. This is part of decolonization. Decolonization is telling our stories through Indigenous eyes. And, this is part of what I learned from Myron, right? Our work overlapped quite a bit, Myron Dewey and I. Myron was, of course, the founder of Digital Smoke Signals, who was killed back in September. I miss him terribly. But his dream was, to see our people telling their stories through their own eyes, in creative ways, and be creative about it. There is, we do have this digital media, document, be creative, create small films, smart little two-piece clips, speaking your truth, whatever it takes, because our history has been co-opted, and there's a large population of the world, including our own people, that suffer from historical amnesia. And then there's the intergenerational layers of trauma that resulted from residential schools. Let's remember that right now is the sense of urgency for missing and murdered Indigenous women, but has not yet been addressed monetarily, by way of the promises of Canada and the Trudeau government. Don't confuse yourself with the liberals or the conservatives or liberal government. They have interchangeable heads, and all these policies are designed for the same thing. It's a federal objective, and they participate in it, and they control the platforms. Let's not be distracted. Let's learn how to pick our battles. Let's try to focus on those collective rights, those things that we owe, that all of us have in common. Let's not be fighting with each other. Women are sacred. I haven't jumped onto this like non-binary culture. I love you and respect you, but we as Indigenous people, we see like our sexuality is being so multifaceted, and it's this is the wonderful diversity that the way Creator put us on this planet. And while we're fighting over little tiny things, they're in the process of extinguishment, the final death throes. I talked to Thomas, and whole communities have disappeared in his lifetime. Disappeared. You don't think it's possible? It's happening right now. All of these benefit agreements that we're signing with the Crown and the provincial governments. Manitoba Hydro. I mean, that's a provincial Crown corporation, and many of them are. There was the Northern Flood Agreement, and the guy held up a pen and said, should the waters fluctuate above or below that of the height of a pen, your people would be compensated. There's no people out there bearing gifts for us. When money comes, it's for a reason. There is a federal political will informed by the Crown, which is informed by the doctrine of discovery. That's where their rights come from. Ours come from Creator. So let's pick it up. I love you guys. I'm excited. I'm excited to see the way this is beginning to manifest itself throughout our communities. Realize there are people that are in positions right now where I'm sure they have regrets for things they've done in the past, and I don't think it's necessary for us to attack those people. Some people have engaged, and a lot of our people have engaged in many things that were antithetical towards what collective rights are all about. But a lot of that is just the control. It's the control of the federal government. Because when you attack a people on the level of as a child, you're immediately affecting their those processes of development that create leaders, right? I mean, those are very formative years. And they want to suck the wind out of our kids before they come to a point where they could learn how to be the initiators of their own lives. But our children need comfort, and they need love. And when we give them that, the parts of their brain will develop, in a good way, in such a way that maybe we wouldn't see all the mental illnesses that we see. Let's remember, there's also, food deserts out there. A lot of our people have diabetes, including myself, and that has to do with the lack of proper nutrition, affordable nourishment. So remember that a lot of our people are in despair. Lift your heads high. For those who cannot, be kind, and go to an elder today. Ask him to tell you a story. hug your grandchildren. Many blessings.